My brother stole my wife, and my parents took his side. So I took the house, and he ended up in ICU. The day I discovered my wife was sleeping with my brother, I lost 3 people at once. Not just my wife. Not just my brother. My parents too. And somehow, that hurt the most. Because betrayal from an enemy is expected. Betrayal from family feels like someone reaching into your chest and tearing something out with their bare hands. For 38 years, I believed family was everything. I was wrong. My name is Ethan Brooks. Until 3 years ago, I thought I had a good life. Nothing extravagant. Just stable. Predictable. The kind of life most people spend decades trying to build. I owned a construction company in Columbus, Ohio. Not a huge corporation. Just a successful local business with about 40 employees. Enough to provide a comfortable living. Enough to buy a nice house. Enough to support my wife, Lauren. We'd been married for 11 years. No children. Not because we didn't want them. We tried. For years. Doctors. Treatments. Heartbreak. Eventually, we stopped talking about it. Lauren said she was okay. I pretended I was too. Looking back, maybe that's where everything started to fall apart. Maybe we became roommates instead of husband and wife. Maybe loneliness created cracks neither of us noticed. Or maybe Lauren was simply the kind of person who always wanted more. I'll never know. What I do know is that my younger brother, Ryan, had spent his entire life taking things that belonged to me. Ryan was 34, charming, good-looking, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. People loved him, women especially. Unfortunately, charm and character aren't the same thing. Ryan never held a job longer than a year, never paid his bills on time, never took responsibility for anything. But somehow, whenever he messed up, my parents were there to save him. Again, and again, and again. Growing up, Ryan was the golden child. I was the responsible one. The reliable one. The boring one. When Ryan crashed Dad's truck at 19 while drunk, Dad blamed the road conditions. When Ryan got arrested after a bar fight, Mom said the other guy provoked him. When Ryan borrowed money and never paid it back, they called him young and learning. Meanwhile, I worked, studied, built a career, paid my own way. And somehow, that was expected. No praise, no recognition. Just responsibility. I learned early that fairness wasn't something my parents believed in. Still, they were family. So I tolerated it. When Ryan lost another job at 33 and couldn't afford rent, guess who helped him? Me. I let him stay in a guest property I owned, rent-free, for nearly 8 months. Lauren even convinced me to buy him groceries. He's your brother, she would say. He just needs support. I remember laughing. If only I knew how much support she was already giving him. The first sign appeared 6 months before everything exploded. Lauren became protective of her phone. Very protective. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter. Suddenly, it never left her hand. She took it to the bathroom. To bed. Even outside to get the mail. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But after 11 years of marriage, suspicion feels insulting. You don't want to believe the worst. So you explain things away. She's stressed. She's distracted. She's talking to friends. Anything except the truth. Then came the late nights, the girls' nights, the weekend shopping trips, the mysterious errands, small things. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to create a strange feeling in my stomach. One Friday evening, I came home earlier than expected. A project meeting had been canceled. I walked into the house around 3 in the afternoon. The living room was empty, kitchen empty, bedroom empty. Lauren's car was gone. Nothing unusual, until I noticed something sitting on the kitchen island. Ryan's sunglasses. I stared at them for several seconds, confused. Maybe he'd stopped by. Maybe he'd forgotten them earlier. Reasonable explanations existed. At least that's what I told myself. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That night, Lauren returned home around 8. Relaxed. Happy. Almost glowing. I casually asked if she'd seen Ryan recently. The reaction lasted less than a second. But I saw it. A flash of panic. Then a smile. Oh, not really. A lie. Instantly. And for the first time, I felt genuine fear. The next few weeks were torture. I began noticing everything. Every text message. Every excuse. Every glance. Pieces of a puzzle slowly forming into a picture I didn't want to see. Then fate handed me the final piece. It happened on a Tuesday. I was reviewing invoices at the office when one of my credit card alerts appeared on my phone. A charge. $287. A restaurant downtown. The card belonged to Lauren. Normally I wouldn't care. Except she had told me she was visiting her mother that afternoon. Something didn't add up. I called my mother-in-law, just to say hello. She answered immediately. And accidentally destroyed my marriage. Lauren? She asked. No, sweetheart, I haven't seen her in weeks. I don't remember much after that. Only the feeling. Cold. Heavy. like an elevator dropping inside my chest. I left the office, drove downtown, and found the restaurant. What happened next changed everything. Because sitting at a corner table near the window was my wife. Laughing, holding hands, with my brother. And neither of them had any idea I was standing there watching. To be continued. I didn't walk into the restaurant right away. I stood outside the window like a stranger watching someone else's life collapse. Lauren was sitting across from Ryan in a small booth near the back corner. Her hand was resting on top of his. Not a friendly touch. Not accidental. It was intimate, comfortable, familiar. The kind of touch that had happened many times before. Ryan said something, and Lauren laughed. Not the polite laugh she gave me at dinner when I tried to tell her about my day. A real laugh. The one I hadn't heard in months. I felt my hands curl into fists. For one dangerous second, every angry part of me wanted to storm inside, grab Ryan by the collar, and make the whole restaurant watch him explain himself. But I didn't. Because anger gives people excuses. And I was done giving my brother excuses. So I pulled out my phone. I took photos. 1, 2, 3. Then I recorded a short video. Just enough. Just clear enough. Lauren leaning across the table. Ryan brushing hair away from her face. Her smiling like a woman on a date. My wife. With my brother. When the recording ended, I lowered the phone and stood there breathing like I had just run 5 miles. Then I walked away. Not because I was weak. Because I needed proof before I burned my life down. That night, Lauren came home around 9:30. She kissed me on the cheek. Asked if I had eaten. Acted perfectly normal. I watched her move through our kitchen wearing the wedding ring I had put on her finger 11 years earlier. And I realized something terrifying. She was good at lying. Not nervous. Not guilty. Good. How was your mom? I asked. Lauren opened the fridge. Fine. Same as usual. Did you two go out? No. We just stayed at her place. I nodded slowly. My whole body felt cold. That's nice. She didn't even look at me. She just poured herself a glass of water and smiled. Yeah. It was nice. That was the moment something inside me changed. The sadness was still there. The shock. The humiliation. But underneath it, something harder began forming. Clarity. I didn't yell that night. I didn't confront her. I slept in the same bed with her and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called an attorney. His name was Marcus Reed. A divorce lawyer one of my subcontractors had once recommended after his own nightmare marriage ended. Marcus didn't sugarcoat anything. When I showed him the photos and video, he leaned back in his chair and said, Ethan, this is bad emotionally. Legally, it may or may not matter. But financially, we need to move carefully. I told him about the house. Our house. The beautiful 4-bedroom brick home on Maple Ridge Lane. The house Lauren loved showing off. The house my parents praised Ryan for helping me decorate, even though all he had ever done was drink beer on the porch. But here was the part Lauren didn't know. The house was not marital property. At least not fully. I had bought the land before marriage. I had started building the home before the wedding. My uncle had helped me structure the ownership through a family trust years earlier. Mostly for business liability reasons. Lauren had lived there. She had decorated it. She had bragged about it. But legally, her claim was weaker than she thought. Marcus smiled when I handed him the documents. Your uncle did you a favor, he said. You have no idea, I replied. For the next 2 weeks, I became an actor in my own home. Lauren lied. I smiled. Ryan texted her. I pretended not to notice. Every time she said she was going somewhere, I documented it. Every strange charge. Every late return. Every hidden call. I didn't stalk her. I didn't threaten her. I didn't explode. I simply collected the truth. And the truth was ugly. Hotel receipts. Restaurant charges. Messages synced to an old tablet Lauren had forgotten was still connected to her account. I found things I wish I could erase from my memory. Photos. Names. Dates. Messages between my wife and my brother that made my stomach turn. Ryan calling me boring. Lauren saying she felt trapped. Ryan joking that I was too loyal to ever suspect them. That one almost made me break. Too loyal. They didn't think I was good. They thought I was useful. There is a difference. Then came the message that changed everything. Lauren, what about the house? Ryan, once you divorce him, you'll get half. Then we can finally stop sneaking around. Lauren, your parents think he'll forgive us eventually. Ryan, he always does. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because of Lauren. Not because of Ryan. Because of the words your parents. My parents knew. Or at least Ryan had told Lauren they knew. That night, I drove to my parents' house without warning. My mother opened the door wearing her usual soft smile. Ethan, what a surprise. Dad was in his recliner watching baseball. Ryan's truck was not outside. Good. I stepped into the living room and didn't sit down. Did you know? I asked. Mom blinked. Know what? I looked at Dad. He muted the television slowly. About Ryan and Lauren. Silence. That was my answer. My mother's face changed first. Not shock. Not confusion. Guilt. Dad rubbed his forehead. Ethan, calm down. Those 3 words told me everything. Calm down. Not. What are you talking about? Not. That can't be true. Calm down. I felt something in me crack. How long? Mom clasped her hands together. Ethan, it isn't that simple. I laughed once. It came out hollow. My wife is sleeping with my brother. That sounds pretty simple. Dad stood up. Watch your tone with your mother. My tone? My voice rose before I could stop it. You knew my wife was cheating on me with your other son. And you're worried about my tone? Mom started crying. But not for me. She cried the way she always did when she wanted the room to feel sorry for her. Ryan made a mistake, she whispered. A mistake? I said. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. This is betrayal. Dad crossed his arms. Your marriage had problems. Lauren was unhappy. It felt like being punched. So this is my fault? No one said that. You just did. Mom stepped closer. Ryan loves her. Ethan. I stared at her. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I had heard wrong. But I hadn't. My own mother had looked me in the eye and said my brother loved my wife. As if that mattered. As if love could sanitize betrayal. As if my pain was just an inconvenience standing in the way of their happiness. I nodded slowly. Did you tell him to stop? Neither of them answered. Did you tell Lauren to confess? Silence. Did either of you care what this would do to me? Mom wiped her eyes. We were trying to keep the family together. No, I said quietly. You were trying to protect Ryan. Dad's face hardened. He's your brother. And I was your son. That shut him up. For about 3 seconds. Then he said the sentence that ended my relationship with him forever. Sometimes the stronger child has to carry more. I stared at him. The stronger child. That was what I had been reduced to. Not loved. Not protected. Not defended. Just strong enough to be sacrificed. I looked at my mother. She couldn't meet my eyes. That hurt worse than Dad's words. Because part of me had hoped she would choose me at least once. Just once. But she didn't. She chose Ryan. Again. I took a breath. Then I said, I'm filing for divorce. Mom looked up quickly. Ethan, please don't make this ugly. That almost made me laugh. Ugly? They had already made it ugly. I was just refusing to hide it. Dad pointed at me. You need to think before you ruin everyone's life. No, I said. For once, I'm going to think before you ruin mine. Then I walked out. My mother followed me to the driveway. Ethan, wait. I opened my truck door. She grabbed my arm. Please. Don't punish your brother forever. I looked down at her hand. Then at her face. You should have said that to him before he touched my wife. I pulled away and left. The next morning, Lauren was served with divorce papers at work. I made sure it happened there. Not to embarrass her publicly, but because I knew if she got them at home, she would destroy documents. Marcus had warned me. People in panic do stupid things. By noon, my phone exploded. Lauren called first, then Ryan, then Mom, then Dad. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove home with 2 movers and a locksmith. Lauren arrived 40 minutes later. Her face was red, her hair messy, still holding the divorce papers in one hand. What is this? She screamed from the driveway. I stood on the porch. You know what it is. You had me served at work? You had an affair with my brother. She flinched. Good. At least the truth could still hit her. Ryan's truck pulled in behind her 5 minutes later. Of course he came. He climbed out wearing sunglasses and arrogance, like this was just another situation he could charm his way through. Ethan, let's talk like adults. I looked at him. Adults don't sleep with their brother's wife. His jaw tightened. Lauren started crying. Ethan, please. We didn't mean for it to happen. I almost smiled. That line. As if betrayal was weather. As if it just happened. Like rain. Like thunder. Like 2 people accidentally fell into months of lies. You didn't mean for it to happen? I asked. No, she whispered. It just became emotional first, and then stop. She closed her mouth. I don't want the story you tell yourself so you can sleep at night. Ryan stepped forward. Don't talk to her like that. I looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. Not as my little brother. Not as my parents' favorite. Not as the charming screw-up everyone forgave. Just a selfish man standing in my driveway after destroying my marriage and acting offended by my anger. You should leave, I said. Ryan laughed. This is Lauren's home too. No, I said. It isn't. Lauren froze. What does that mean? I handed her a copy of the trust documents. Her eyes moved across the page. Confusion. Then panic. Ryan snatched the papers from her. What is this? The house belongs to the trust, I said. I have controlling interest. Lauren has no ownership claim beyond whatever the court decides regarding marital contributions. She can request compensation. She cannot take the house. Lauren looked at me like I had slapped her. You hid this from me? I stared at her. You were planning to take half my house and move my brother into it. Her mouth opened. Then closed. Because she knew. She knew I had seen the messages. Ryan's face turned red. That's not going to hold up. My attorney disagrees. He stepped closer. For a second, I thought he might swing. Part of me wanted him to. But Marcus had warned me. Do not give them drama. Give them paperwork. So I stood still. Calm. Controlled. The locksmith came out behind me and cleared his throat. Locks are changed. Lauren's face collapsed. You changed the locks? You moved out when you chose him. I said. I live here. Not anymore. She started sobbing then. Real tears. Maybe for the marriage. Maybe for the house. Maybe for the life she thought she could steal without consequences. Ryan put his arm around her. Come on, Lauren. We'll fight this. I looked at him. You should. Then I added. You'll need money. That hit him harder than anything else. Because Ryan didn't have money. He had charm, excuses, and parents who enabled him. But not money. Lauren stared at the house behind me. The porch swing. The garden. The stone walkway. All the things she had treated like trophies. And for the first time, she realized she might lose them all. By sunset, she had packed 2 suitcases under supervision. She took clothes. Personal items. Jewelry I had bought her. I didn't fight about the small things. Let her have the jewelry. Let her have the dresses. Let her have every gift I had given to a woman who no longer existed. But she did not take the house. She did not take my business files. She did not take my grandmother's dining table. She did not take the framed photo from our wedding. Not because I wanted it, because I didn't want her to have the satisfaction of rewriting history. When she left, Ryan opened the passenger door for her. Before she got in, she turned back toward me. Ethan, she whispered. For 1 second, she looked like the woman I married. Younger, softer, scared. And for 1 dangerous second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then Ryan touched her back. And the spell broke. I closed the door, locked it, and stood alone inside the silent house. That was the first night I truly understood grief. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sits beside you in every room. Thanks for watching. This video is gonna be the quiet kind. Thanks for watching. The kind that makes your own home feel like a museum of someone else's life. I walked into the bedroom and saw the dent on her side of the mattress. Her perfume still lingered near the closet. Her coffee mug sat in the sink. Everything looked normal. But nothing was. I sat on the floor beside the bed and finally cried. Not because I wanted her back. Because the life I had believed in was gone. And worse than that, maybe it had never existed. For the next month, the divorce became war. Lauren hired an attorney Ryan couldn't afford. Which meant my parents were paying. Of course. They accused me of financial abuse. Emotional abandonment. Controlling behavior. Anything they could throw at the wall. But Marcus was ready. Every accusation was met with evidence. Every lie was met with documents. Every dramatic claim was met with dates, receipts, and messages. Lauren claimed the affair was brief. We produced records showing months. Ryan claimed he had never entered my home behind my back. We produced security footage. My parents claimed they didn't know. We produced Lauren's messages mentioning conversations with them. After that, the tone changed. Suddenly, everyone wanted mediation. Suddenly, everyone wanted peace. Suddenly, I was taking things too far. Funny how people only discover peace when accountability arrives. Then came the family meeting. I didn't want to go. Marcus told me not to. But my mother begged. She left voicemails, texts, emails. Finally, she sent one message that made me pause. Your father is not sleeping. Please come talk before this destroys us. Before this destroys us. Not me. Us. Still, I went. Not because I wanted reconciliation. Because I wanted to look them all in the eye one last time. The meeting was at my parents' house. Lauren was there. Ryan was there. Mom and Dad sat together on the couch. Like judges. Like victims. I remained standing. Ryan looked exhausted. Lauren looked thinner. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years in 1 month. Dad looked angry. That was normal. He was always angry when consequences reached someone he loved. And he loved Ryan most. Mom started first. We all made mistakes. I raised a hand. No. She blinked. No, what? We are not doing that. Ethan, no. You don't get to put my reaction in the same sentence as their betrayal. Ryan scoffed. Here we go. I looked at him. You slept with my wife in hotels I paid for with money I earned while you lived rent-free on my property. His face twisted. I didn't ask you to help me. No. You just accepted it. Lauren whispered. Can we please not fight? I turned to her. You lost the right to ask for peace when you chose deception. Dad slammed his hand on the armrest. Enough. 27. I looked at him. He stood. This family has been through enough humiliation. I almost laughed. There it is. What? You're humiliated. Not sorry. Humiliated. His face went red. You posted nothing. I told no one. The humiliation came from what they did, not from me exposing it. Mom started crying again. Please, Ethan. Ryan is struggling. Good. Everyone froze. Maybe it was cruel. Maybe I should regret saying it. But I don't. Ryan had never struggled with consequences, only inconvenience. There is a difference. Mom looked horrified. How can you say that? Because none of you cared when I was struggling. Lauren began sobbing quietly. Ryan put an arm around her. That old rage sparked in my chest. But this time, it didn't control me. It sharpened me. Dad pointed toward the door. If you can't forgive, then maybe you shouldn't be here. I nodded. You're right. Mom stood quickly. Ethan, no. I pulled an envelope from my jacket and placed it on the coffee table. What's that? Dad asked. Notice. Ryan frowned. What notice? The guest property you live in belongs to my company. Your rent-free arrangement is over. You have 30 days to vacate. Ryan shot to his feet. You can't do that. I can. Mom gasped. Ethan? Where is he supposed to go? I looked at her. He's 34. Ask him. Dad stepped toward me. You are not throwing your brother into the street. I'm not throwing him anywhere. I'm ending charity. Ryan grabbed the envelope and tore it open. His hands shook as he read. For the first time, he looked scared. Not guilty. Scared. Because he finally understood. I wasn't yelling anymore. I was removing myself. And with me went the money. The house, the safety net. The quiet support everyone had taken for granted. Lauren looked up at me through tears. Ethan, please. Don't do this. I met her eyes. You did this. Then I turned to my parents. All of you did. I walked out before anyone could answer. That was supposed to be the end. I thought they would hate me from a distance. I thought Lauren and Ryan would move into some apartment together. I thought my parents would keep blaming me until time made them tired. But betrayal doesn't end cleanly. People who feel entitled to your forgiveness don't accept boundaries. They see boundaries as attacks. And Ryan. Ryan was never good at losing. 2 weeks after that meeting, he showed up at my house drunk. Not slightly drunk. Destroyed. It was almost midnight. Rain hammered against the windows. I was in the kitchen when headlights flashed across the living room wall. At first, I thought it was Lauren. Then I heard pounding on the front door. Ethan! Ryan's voice. Slurred. Angry. I didn't open it. I called through the door. Leave. He pounded harder. You think you're better than me? I picked up my phone. Leave, Ryan. You took everything. I almost laughed. Everything. He had taken my wife. My parents. My peace. But in his mind, I was the thief. You have 30 seconds before I call the police. He kicked the door. Hard. The frame shook. Open the door. I called the police. While I was on the phone, he went around to the side of the house. I heard glass break. The side window. My heart kicked hard. I grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I kept in the hall closet. Not because I wanted to use it. Because a drunk, violent man was trying to break into my house. Brother or not. Blood does not give someone the right to threaten you. I heard him stumble through the mud outside. Then another crash. This time near the garage. Sirens were still minutes away. I moved into the hallway and shouted, Ryan, the police are coming. He screamed something I couldn't understand. Then I heard a terrible sound. A slip. A crash. Metal. Glass. Then silence. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then Ryan groaned. I opened the back door carefully. Rain hit my face. The motion light flickered on. Ryan was lying at the bottom of the stone steps near the side entrance. Blood on his forehead. One leg twisted wrong. Broken glass scattered around him from the window he had smashed. For a moment, I couldn't move. Because despite everything, he was still my brother. I called 911 again. This time for an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, Ryan was barely conscious. He kept mumbling Lauren's name. Not mine. Lauren's. They loaded him into the ambulance. A police officer asked what happened. I told the truth. All of it. Ryan had shown up intoxicated. He had tried to force entry. He had broken a window. He had fallen. The officer looked at the broken glass, the damaged door, the security cameras, and nodded. We'll pull the footage. By 3 a.m, my mother called. I answered. I don't know why. Maybe because some reflexes die hard. Her voice was hysterical. What did you do? I closed my eyes. There it was. Not is Ryan alive? Not. What happened? What did you do? Ryan broke into my property drunk and fell, I said. He's in the ICU. Her words hit me harder than I expected. ICU. I leaned against the kitchen counter. For one brief second, all the anger disappeared. And there was only fear. How bad? Mom sobbed. They don't know yet. Head injury. Internal bleeding. His leg is broken. Ethan, what did you do? I opened my eyes. And whatever softness had appeared vanished. I called the ambulance. Dad came on the phone. His voice was cold. You better pray he survives. I stared at the broken window across the room. Rain was still blowing through it. My house was damaged. My marriage was gone. My brother was in the ICU. And somehow, they still made me the villain. I said quietly, I already did more for him than he ever did for me. Then I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen while rain soaked the floor near the broken window. By sunrise, the house was silent again. But this time, the silence felt different. Because everything had changed. Ryan was alive. Barely. Lauren was at the hospital. My parents were blaming me. And by noon, half my extended family would be calling me a monster. But they didn't know about the footage. They didn't know about the police report. They didn't know about the messages. They didn't know that Ryan had not come to apologize that night. He had come to take back control. And this time, I wasn't going to let him.